Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Rosica, and today I'm going to be talking about how I use visual literacy to help teach complex scientific processes such as photosynthesis, which is the example I'm going to be using today. So the group of students that I'm going to be dealing with is ninth graders in regular biology. So it's a really wide mix of students that are really motivated and bright to students who aren't really that interested in science and don't have much of a background. So it's a really wide mix. And when you're talking about something like photosynthesis, there's just so much biochemistry that's involved that, to be honest, coming from the middle schools, they just haven't had a lot of exposure to it yet. So it's really a challenge to go into any level of detail. So to start out, we just kind of look at what is the overall reaction of photosynthesis. Most kids know what it is. They know it's the way that plants make food for themselves, but they don't really know much more than that. So we look at something like this, which is the actual balanced equation, and this in itself is enough to make a lot of kids just shut off. So we start by kind of reducing that to, all right, well, let's look at the basics of what goes in and what comes out without worrying about whether it's a balanced equation, because honestly, most kids don't really know what that means at this point anyway. Even with this being said, it's still pretty complex. Then we go into the details where, well, this doesn't just happen in one quick step. There's actually really kind of two major steps that occur. The first step involves the photosystems, and you show them a picture like this, and kids are really now starting to get kind of frustrated and confused by, they don't even know what some of these words mean or what these letters symbolize. So I show them this just to show, hey, this is complex stuff. And then it gets even better when you say, all right, well, that's just the first step. Now we go to the second step where we take the carbon from the atmosphere and we turn it into organic sugars. And that's, you look at a diagram like this, even kids in my AP bio classes, which these are really motivated, really smart kids. A picture like this at first sight can get really complicated. So, this is just way over our heads. There's no way we can cover something this complicated. And this is kind of the looks that I'll get from a lot of my students, like, what are you talking about? And most of them will just completely shut down, to the point where their heads are exploding. So how do we take that and simplify it? Well, I start with a simple question and I say, okay, well, what do cells eat? And cells don't really eat anything per se, but what do they use as their food source? And we talk about the fact that one of the major food sources is this molecule called glucose, which a lot of the kids have already heard of. They know that it's a sugar and it's found in a lot of the food we eat. So, well, where does that come from? So at this point, I give students this worksheet with a bunch of simple pictures on it, and we start with just an apple. Which seems like an appropriate representation in a classroom. That apples would have, among other things in them, they have a good source of glucose. And how did that glucose get there? Well, it was photosynthesis that occurred to put it in the apple in the first place. So then we look at this simple pictorial with symbols that they should recognize, and I say, all right, well, what do you think these represent? Um, and students will usually say, okay, well, that first one is like sunlight or light energy that they know the plants need. Second one say a balloon. Well, this one's probably the most difficult. I say, well, how do you inflate a balloon? Well, we blow it up using our lungs, and when we exhale air, a lot of kids know, well, that's carbon dioxide. And then the little drip, most kids know right away, oh, that's water. The apple we've already kind of described, all right, well, that's going to be our source of glucose. And then finally, the tank. A lot of kids will associate like an oxygen tank, like a scuba diver or someone that needs oxygen for medical reasons. So say, okay, well, there's our O2. So we can kind of draw this back now to our original equation. So this is what everything is, and we know what's on the left of the arrow, that's what goes in, and what's on the right of the arrow, that's what comes out. Okay, so now we turn to this reaction. And although we're simplifying, we do want to at least still go a little bit more detailed than just knowing what goes in, what goes out. We want to know it's a multi-step process. So we look at this and say, all right, this whole thing is happening inside this big kind of yellow thing. Well, what is that? These are chloroplasts. We've actually looked at these under the microscope. This is an image that kids would actually see real water plants that we look at and say, all those little green jelly beans, those are chloroplasts. And this is where the whole thing's going down. So a little bit more detailed picture of what this looked like if we could zoom in even better. And now I say, all right, let's talk about step one. The first process, which is labeled with the 1, what is that? Well, this is that picture I showed you earlier, the photosystems. We're going to simplify and just call it the light-dependent reactions, okay? So it's dependent on light. We'll really break that down. All right, well, what does that require? If it's light dependent, then that means the first reaction needs light. It depends on light. And then there's something else that's also needed. One of the other essential things that all kids know plants need, which is water. So sunlight's used, water goes in, and at the end of the process, we produce two things. Number one, we produce a waste product, which is oxygen gas, which is important. And then the second thing is this guy here, ATP, which is chemical energy. The kids have already been exposed to this in the previous unit, so they actually do know what that is at this point. Okay? Step 2. All right, we talked about this very complex diagram. All right, how do we make sense out of this? What's going on here? Well, don't worry about all these little transitions and all these different arrows. It's not important. We say this is the light independent. So if light dependent, it depends on light. Light independent means no light is necessary for this reaction because we've already made the energy. We haven't made the energy. I shouldn't say that. We've converted the energy from light to a chemical form in the form of ATP. So that's what's going to run this next reaction. And what do we need? Well, we need the carbon. And the carbon comes from the form of carbon dioxide that the plants take in from the atmosphere. Through this really complex set of chemical reactions using the ATP energy, they transform it. They go through this thing called carbon fixation. And at the end of the whole process, they make organic sugars. And eventually that gets turned into glucose, C6H12O6. At this level of biology, I'm happy if the kids can interpret a diagram like this. I don't even ask that they memorize it per se. It's just like, if I show you this diagram, can you explain it to me? That's really what I think is the most important detail. And that's how I go about doing it. Thanks.